For this project, I wanted to explore how the idea of the abject relates to surveillance. At its core, I set out for the paradox of the abject to be a rotating ball of hair that follows users around a space using facial recognition. Our movements and behaviors are tracked, making our bodies sites of surveillance and control. With human hair as its medium, I aimed for my work to embody the fusion of physical representation and technological tools, underscoring the deep interconnection between these two aspects of surveillance. So I researched this project and I looked at My Little Piece of Privacy. It's an interactive installation that uses servo motors to power a curtain that follows those walking past the window. It essentially blocks them from seeing inside as they move. And the thing that I really enjoy about this work is the fact that the curtain itself, while trying to provide privacy, actually becomes a spectacle. And it draws more people towards it because of this, which subverts the purpose entirely. This privacy paradox is really interesting to me because it almost flips the side of the artwork onto the viewers and as it responds to their movements, and it wouldn't exist without them. I also had a look at the abject. Um, and abject is art that's used to describe artworks which explore themes that transgress and threaten our sense of cleanliness and propriety, particularly referencing the bodily functions. I've always been really interested in art that bases itself in objection, particularly the work of the sculptor and installation artist Robert Gober. And he taps into the uncanny and defamiliarizes everyday objects and the human body. And one really significant piece of work that shares some of the same materials of my own um, from his is the short haired cheese. And it's made from beeswax and human hair. And for me, this piece really evokes disgust and intrigue, and it has such a familiar everyday object that's been humanized in such an uncomfortable way. Um, so the use of human hair in my project really taps into the concept of the abject and the ability for an object to evoke feelings of both disgust and also fascination. The abject becomes this embodiment of the complex relationships that we have with technology and surveillance, and we may recoil at the invasion of privacy and loss of autonomy, yet we're inexplicably drawn to the convenience and sense of security that it provides. So by blurring the lines between the human and the non-human, the paradox of the abject becomes more than a mere surveillance device. It transforms into an object that challenges this increasing integration of technology into our lives, where our bodies and behaviors are constantly monitored and manipulated. It aims to serve as a commentary on how the ever growing encroachment of technological systems upon our existence and shine a spotlight on the inextricable connection between surveillance and body. Um, so once I knew the concept, I needed to dive into the technical research. And the first most important thing was the servo motors. So once I knew what I wanted to make, I needed to decide the parts I would need. The natural choice was a 360-degree servo, but I needed one that could hold the weight of the pole plus the camera and hair. So I combated this by using a hollow, lightweight pole and a really light paper mache shell for the hairball. But then I researched different types of servo motors and I purchased one that could move 10 kilograms, allegedly. Another piece of research into servo motors I undertook was different types. So initially, I wanted my piece to be able to sit in the middle of a space and rotate 360 degrees. And in all of my prototypes, I did use an SG19 micro servo. But after a few different iterations, I realized that the constant 360-degree rotation would cause tangled wires, blind spots, and really ineffective tracking. Due to not having a top-down camera as I'd originally proposed. So 360 degrees would have worked for that. Um, Due to this, I decided to switch to a 180-degree servo and a piece that was mounted next to a wall, so it would only need to see what was in front of it. And then I had to research about machine learning and some face recognition. Uh, and I initially planned to do this from a top-down angle and then train a machine learning model to track the blobs, which would be people, as they moved around the space, and then have a dummy camera inside the hairball to follow the one closest to the center. And I decided that it would be much more conceptually powerful to mount the camera inside the hairball, and therefore I had to scrap these ideas. So after deciding this, I began using Face API to detect faces for my hairball camera to track. But I found it was really ineffective when it needed to communicate the positions of faces to the Arduino. So eventually, after doing loads of research on the different computer vision models, I came across OpenCV, which I used in conjunction with Python to power the tracking and movements for all of my work. Um, this is my first prototype. I used webcam on my laptop, and I had a really simple goal, just making the servo go left when a face was present and right when it came up to the next face. For the next stage of prototyping, I made a miniature version of my hairball and I attached it with a dummy camera model to the servo. And then I made it rotate left when a face moved left and right when a face moved right. And it was during this iteration I realized I would need to ensure it only followed the closest face, otherwise it would be rotating really erratically the whole time. So due to this, I made it draw a box around each visible face and then only followed the face with the largest box drawn around it. The next stage was fabrication. So I made all the individual parts of the piece and ensured they worked together. I initially had a massive issue with the servo motor spinning due to the weight of the artwork on top of it. It would just spin around on the floor, so I nailed it down to some wood to anchor it. And I also really struggled connecting the motor to the pole, so I built a lightweight interface using cork and then drilled the pole into that and attached a smaller spinner to connect the servo motor to the pole. For the top of my piece, I needed to make a large, really hollow ball of hair that could hold a camera. So I made a paper mache shell from a balloon and newspaper, and then I cut this into very small pieces, mixed up different strands of hair, and pressed it onto the surface. And the process was really similar to flocking, and it required loads and loads of layers. And once completed, I was able to trim the hair down so that it didn't obscure the camera, and then attach the webcam inside. Um, Troubleshooting. So this was my main issue that I ran into during fabrication, and it's demonstrated here on the right. As the camera moved to find a face and place it in the center of the screen, it would flick back and forth rapidly, and if the face was stationary, it would be constantly trying to track it. So to combat this, I had to add in a fourth command called hold, and this command would be triggered when X, so the face, is within the center bounds, so the Arduino would hold the position instead of returning itself back to the start. It's my tech spec. So I used an MG995 servo motor, Leonardo, and a Logitech StreamCam webcam. The Arduino code for this project was actually really simple. It just involved communicating to the servo to ensure that if it saw on the face on the left, it would move left and vice versa. And this ensures the hairball is essentially constantly moving and following people, and I was able to control the speed of movement, the range of motion, and all the pauses between them movements really, really simply. And then slightly more complicated, this is my Python tech spec. So the main things that this does is just connect with Arduino and then also find the face, locate the face, move the camera towards it, and then that function that I spoke about earlier in terms of making sure that it does flick back and forth really erratically. And then obviously once it's done, it ends the capture. And this is my final outcome. So what you can see at the end there is actually when it doesn't detect a face, it just shoots itself right back to the central position, which is something I added in at the end, and I found it looked really effective. Um, and then the future of this project. So I have a couple of ideas of what I would like to do. I really want to refine the fabrication of this work. I didn't have time to do all of the really concise fabrication that I wanted to do, but I really want to 3D print some connectors and interfaces for the pole and servo to make it look slicker instead of the cork interface that I made. I also really want to experiment with faster speeds for tracking. I think it would make it look a lot whizzier, but I know that this would equally require a much bigger servo and a high quality webcam. Um, and I also want to experiment with different ways of mounting and presenting this. So maybe like an overhead tracker, on an overhead track, or as maybe like a larger 360-degree piece of work that sits in the center of a space. I think could be really, really effective. That is the paradox of the object.